There's been a ton of attention on how the trade war affects the US, but how is it affecting China?
China just made all their economic data disappear, actually.
Disappear.
And we call it the good news only policy.
Yeti's Trade War Almanac, Day 35. How tariffs are messing with the economy. Jack and I have been keeping track for you from the tariff trenches.
Today, we're focused on how tariffs are affecting China, actually.
But to illustrate how hard it is to do that, we will just read this very simple, straightforward headline from the Wall Street Journal.
China's official statistics are disappearing.
That's right, Yetis. China is not publishing data if it tells a negative story about China.
In President Xi's authoritarian government, it is good news only when it comes to data.
That's right, China's not publishing data if that data tells a negative story.
In President Xi's authoritarian government, it is good news only when it comes to data.
So, as China limps through the trade war, the data is disappearing like a Snapchat story.
Nick, I'm going to sprinkle on some context.
I would love for you to sprinkle on some context, Jack.
China represents 1/6 of the world's population, but they manufacture 1/3 of the world's products.
That's right, 1 out of 3 of everything you touch is made in China.
And with 145% tariffs, China's biggest customer, the United States, has pretty much gone cold turkey on made in China.
So here's the situation. China is scrambling to find new customers to buy stuff Americans used to buy like 2 months ago.
But the reality is there's no way they can do that. Their factories must be idle right now.
At least millions of workers must be out of work in China just based on what is happening.
China already had deflation, a problem since COVID, which is actually worse than inflation, we should point out.
But now, China is filled with extra products Americans are just not buying because of high prices.
They probably have piles and warehouses full of strollers, staplers, and sandals that used to go to America, but just aren't anymore.
But Yetis, let's zoom back to America for a second. Our economy shrank in the first quarter.
We publish real, reliable data, whether it is good or bad.
So you must be thinking, after everything that we just said, China's economy probably shrank as well over the last quarter.
Nope.
Nope.
Or at least not according to official Chinese data.
Yeah.
Which shows that their economy actually grew 5.4% in the first quarter.
Honestly, Jack and I just don't totally believe that.
We don't believe that number. We think that's probably China's good news only policy talking.
It looks like China gave their numbers a little bit of a Botox, Photoshop, touch-up makeover, if you know what we mean.
Sprinkle a grain of salt on that data.
Hopefully President Xi doesn't make our podcast numbers disappear as well now, Jack.
It's a legitimate risk.
It is. So, Jack, what's the takeaway for our buddies over in China?
China's data is man-made in China.
Yetis, this Wall Street Journal story, it was wild. Because it turns out, time after time after time, as data turns negative in China, they simply end it.
They simply stop publishing it.
They disappear it.
For example, in 2021, during the pandemic, China stopped publishing data on soy sauce production.
Want to know why they did that? Well, because if you knew the soy sauce consumption numbers, you could probably infer how well China's economy is actually doing.
And it wasn't doing well. So they stopped publishing that report.
Then in 2022, China stopped publishing data on cremations. And why is that, Jack?
Because China had just ended their zero COVID policy, they didn't want the world to see a spike in the number of deaths.
In fact, Yetis, one former Chinese premier told the U.S. ambassador that their GDP data was, quote unquote, made up for reference only.
Now, in the short term, China's data manipulation is a strength in this trade war.
Because the public doesn't know the real story about how their country is actually suffering right now.
But long term, China's unreliable data is a major weakness for innovation and for investing.
Because China's economic data can just disappear.
It's man-made in China.